He had dedicated his whole life to the sword. Everyone knew who the Phantom Sword was, and no one could win against him. In his final days, his rival asked him to one day take care of their old sect. The Phantom Swordsman wasn't keen on it at all, when suddenly, in the middle of the conversation, his friend was annihilated. An aura attack also came in his direction, but he blocked it. In front of him stood a being he had never seen before, with an inexplicable aura. The Phantom Swordsman had no chance. Cut in half in a second, how could demonic energy be so strong? The moment he asked this, the talisman his friend had given him shone, and that's how he took over the body of Manhwa, a talentless senior disciple of a famous sect, someone with 2 decades of life filled with pure shame, with skills still weaker than the majority of his juniors. An absolute fool, so foolish that he risked his own life to save someone and died. And that was how the Phantom Swordsman took over his body. Everyone here is still terrible. Their footwork is a mess. They move when they shouldn't, can't keep balance, and because of that, none of their attacks carry real force. After watching for a bit, the conclusion is obvious. No one here even understands the basics. But there is one exception, the instructor. His name is Mu Jin, and unlike the others, he's actually doing a decent job. He corrects mistakes properly, explains things clearly, and doesn't slack off. Turns out, he's the last disciple of the 2nd generation. So naturally, he ended up filling that role. And honestly, there was nothing wrong with that, at least until now. From above, Mu Jin ends the training session. As the disciples leave, murmurs spread. Apparently, he's been stricter lately. Then a girl notices the protagonist and asks if he's okay. He waves back casually, saying he's fine. But in her head, she can't shake the feeling that something about him feels different. Mu Jin walks down the stairs and greets Mu Huai, apologizing for not greeting him earlier because he was busy with training. Mu Huai says he understands. He knows how heavy that responsibility must have been, especially when it should have been his in the first place. Mu Jin bows, saying he's grateful for the opportunity. That's when Mu Huai drops it. He says he'll be taking the role back. The nearby disciples freeze. The girl from earlier whispers to the others, asking if she heard that right. Even Ho realizes now his suspicions were correct. Mu Huai really has changed. Mu Jin pushes back, saying Mu Huai was the one who asked him to take over in the first place. Mu Huai calmly replies, what's wrong with taking responsibility for his own duties again? Mu Jin snaps back. He says Mu Wei forced the role onto him because he lacked confidence. That's when Mu Wei laughs. He realizes it now. This guy isn't just helping out, he wants to become the main disciple, the one who can succeed the sect leader. And with most first-generation disciples busy rebuilding Manhwa, the fastest way to change the sect isn't through elders, it's through the 2nd generation. On top of that, there's the purple aura circulation technique, a technique only the sect leader and the main disciple can learn. Mu Huai needs it, so he won't back down. Mu Jin gets frustrated. He brings up the invasion of the Palace of the Black Knight, says Mu Huai disobeyed orders, stayed behind, and caused others to follow his lead, forcing the elders to intervene. Mu Huai smiles, then admits it. He says Mu Jin is right, and that's exactly why he's taking responsibility now. Mu Jin yells, asking how anyone could trust him. Mu Huai lowers his head, saying Mu Jin simply doesn't understand the situation. As he walks up the stairs, Mu Jin asks what he's misunderstanding. Mu Huai stops. With a cold look, he asks since when did he need Mu Jin's approval. He's not asking for permission. He's informing him. Politely, Mu Jin's mind races. The man in front of him doesn't feel like the senior disciple he knows anymore. Unbothered, Mu Huai announces he'll take over morning training starting tomorrow. Any complaints can be brought up after the session, and he advises Mu Jin not to take it personally. Mu Jin mutters that he feels like he's looking at a completely different person. Mu Huai replies calmly, people change when they come close to death. The disciples whisper among themselves, trying to understand what just happened. Some realize Mu Jin isn't stopping him. Others decide they should talk to Mu Huai directly. As night falls, 2 disciples approach his dorm. Mu Huai senses them instantly. They ask to talk away from others. He grabs his wooden sword. The girl says they want him to take back what he said earlier. Mu Jin only stayed quiet to help him. Mu Huai finds that interesting and asks if Mu Jin sent them. She says no, they came on their own. Mu Wei says then he'll ignore them. That's when they say it. They don't want to be taught by someone weaker than them. Mu Huai stays silent, then says Mount Hua's hierarchy has rotted, and if they doubt his strength, he'll show them. One strike, the girl is disarmed and on her knees. Another strike, the boy goes down too. They're crushed. Hours later, bruised and exhausted, they admit defeat. Mu Huai asks if he lived up to expectations. They say yes. He asks if they still think he's weaker than Mu Jin. They say no. Satisfied, he tells them to rest. Morning training is coming. Elsewhere, Ryan asks whether the pair is truly serious about getting beaten by Mu Huai. One of them replies that this was not the senior disciple they used to know. San agrees, saying that he is clearly very different now, and that stopping him is not something that can be attempted carelessly. Unbeknownst to them, Jin has overheard the entire conversation. Approaching, he asks the remaining disciple what happened between the boy and the girl. Ryan replies that nothing major occurred, they simply disliked the idea of the senior disciple leading the next day's training. A few moments later, Ryan provides further details. Jin says he understands and that he will speak with the pair later. Even if Mu Y is merely defending himself, Jin believes he will step back once he realizes he is not suited for the role. For that reason, trying to remove him behind his back is not the best option. Surprised, Ryan insists they were only worried. Jin responds that he will handle the matter himself, then walks away, leaving Ryan feeling awkward. The next day, the protagonist stands before his new students. Determined to give an explanation for his change, he says that before they begin, there are a few things he needs to address. From below, Jin wonders whether Mu Y had been hiding his abilities enough to injure San and Ho so severely, or if he received help from Chael. In either case, he concludes that the truth will reveal itself sooner or later. By the way, Mu Y conducts the training. Catching everyone off guard, he declares that they are far too weak. While there may be many reasons for someone to become strong, there is only one reason for weakness: a lack of fundamentals. That is why, from that moment on, they will train only the 6th dual sword combination technique in the mornings before moving on to more advanced techniques. Suddenly, someone interrupts. Everyone turns toward the voice. It is Ryan, angrily asking what is wrong with wanting to learn faster. Believing that no one else present can accomplish it, he declares that he will take on the challenge himself. His words leave the disciples speechless. Unbothered, Mu Y remarks that everything here is a mess, cursing countless things under his breath. Calmly, he tells Ryan that if he has complaints, he should come up the stairs. Everyone is surprised both by the senior disciple's composure and by Ryun's reaction. Without hesitation, Ryan begins climbing the stairs. Once at the top, the young man says that he understands what Mu Y means, but does not believe it is right to abandon their current training, especially under Mu Y's leadership, which, as everyone knows, Mu Y cuts him off, saying that he is well aware that everyone believes his martial arts skills are terrible, and he also knows the real reason Ryun stepped forward. He's here to prove exactly that. Mu Y raises his voice and tells everyone to pay attention. From this moment on, he won't take a single step. He'll use only the 6th dual sword technique to block Ryun's attacks. No movement, no footwork. If Ryun manages to touch him with his sword or force him to move even once, Mu Y will take back everything he said and step down from leading morning training. The disciples are stunned. Ryan asks if he isn't being too reckless, just because he beat Mu San and Mu Ho. Mu Y replies calmly. From what he saw, the two were seriously injured, and since Ryan insists on challenging him, Ryun charges forward without hesitation. Just like Mu Y promised, he blocks the strike without taking a single step. Down below, the disciples freeze, mouths hanging open, as the clash continues. The sound of blades echoes non-stop. Ryan pushes himself harder and harder, pouring everything he has into the fight. One disciple recognizes the technique immediately. The concentrated wind sword technique, a high-speed style and Ryun's specialty among all second-generation disciples. Watching closely, Chael notices it too. Ryan is faster than before, but it doesn't matter. Mu Y blocks every single strike with overwhelming ease. While defending, Mu Y casually comments that Ryan is more troublesome than the other two. He actually has to use shoulder strength this time. Then he mocks him. Is that really all he's got? Ryan clenches his teeth. He admits it, he's frustrated, but this is his limit. He doesn't know what else to do. Someone in the crowd whispers if that's really the senior disciple they used to know. After all, he hasn't moved an inch. Mu Jin watches in disbelief, eyes wide. How is this even possible? Suddenly, it looks like Ryan lands a hit, but in his own thoughts, he realizes the truth. That wasn't a victory, it was confirmation. Mu Y then explains calmly, it's not that he's strong, it's that when someone becomes obsessed with striking, their footwork collapses, and once that happens, the sword becomes meaningless. That's why, even while injured, he could block everything without moving. He tells Ryan he'll demonstrate what it means to swing a sword using the entire body, and then it happens. One blow. The strike is so clean, so overwhelming, that the entire training ground falls silent. From above, Mu Y orders Mu San and Mu Ho to carry Ryan to the infirmary. Then he turns to the others, tells them to stop staring, and raise their swords. The protagonist announces that morning training will now begin. Next, we see him correcting every small mistake his new students make. We're taken to the past when our boy asks Hyun why he chose Hwai as a disciple. The young man simply says Hwai is pretty average, but he's never seen him give up on anything. Dako asks if his friend chose the boy just for his determination. A bit sorrowful, Hyun says that talented disciples reach martial enlightenment on their own. But that's not the case for Hwai, and since shaping a martial master from an ordinary person is a mentor's duty, he chose the boy. Back in the present, our boy says he'd love to choose a few talented disciples, but now he's the senior disciple leading the second-generation disciples of Mount Hoa. So he can't leave anyone behind, even if doing so is far more frustrating than he expected. That's why, if he meets Hyun in the afterlife, the guy will owe him a really good drink. Even though deep down, he just wants to know how the young man is doing, since he always focused on improving himself rather than taking care of his friends. Trying to comfort himself, our boy concludes that Hyun must be fine since he rarely lost fights, and says it would be nice to see his friend again someday. After a few days, we learn that the proper training of the second-generation disciples is going smoothly, even though it's been a tough road as they had to start from scratch. Still, Why is sure that the plum blossoms will bloom through all the hardship. Walking through the Crimson Forest, he says he also has a long road ahead, since his first steps to change the Manhwa sect must begin with raising his own martial realm. The senses are one of the most important aspects in that process, because the sharper they are, the easier it becomes to notice small changes, something that helps a lot in martial arts training. And even though he felt nothing when he first opened his eyes in that body, now he's certain that someone is watching him. But not in a threatening way, just out of curiosity. Still, the protagonist can't quite tell who it is yet. That's something he intends to find out soon. After some time walking, Huai reaches his destination. Inside the temple, we see Hyun Gak, who apparently knows the former owner of Dako's new body quite well. Bowing and greeting, our boy says he's there to study the secret techniques. Though intrigued, the man says it's fine. He only asks the boy to be careful and not overdo it, since he's still not fully healed. The protagonist says he'll be careful. Then Gak mentions he heard that one of his disciples was rude to the boy. Confused, our boy wonders who the man is talking about, since he beat up 3 different people, quickly deciding that it doesn't matter much. Just then, Hyun surprises him by apologizing, saying Musan only did what he believed was worth doing. With a smile, the man even says that in another time the boy would have faced much worse consequences. Without saying anything, the protagonist realizes that apparently he won't face any issues. He then says he simply did what he had to do as the senior disciple, so the man doesn't need to worry about anything. Shocked, Gak wonders if he really just heard those words come out of Hui's mouth, and if his eyes were always that sharp. In his thoughts, our boy wonders why the hell he's being stared at like that. Smiling, Gak says he's glad to know the young man is looking after his people, and that in that case, he's free to proceed. Watching the protagonist walk away, the man wonders how someone who lost his master can still be so full of determination. A few minutes later, we see the protagonist trying to figure out what the first steps are to raise his own martial realm, and what the hell a martial realm even is, since the definition he knows is wrong. We learn that life and death in the Jianghu aren't decided solely by the strength of martial arts. What really matters when it comes to survival is the ability to apply the martial arts you've learned, as well as quick and precise judgment and thinking. That's why a martial realm is the mastery of martial arts, along with the experience and wisdom that come with it. This was the definition of martial realm that Dako reached after endless training and contemplation. That's why the first steps to elevate one's realm begin with truly understanding martial arts. Sitting while reading, the protagonist wonders what martial arts belong to the Manhwa sect. But after thinking for a bit, he realizes he has no idea, since there are things he still isn't allowed to read, as they're restricted to prevent greedy disciples from skipping essential steps. Thinking about that, our boy concludes that Manhwa is on the more lost side. But even so, it has a systematic set of martial arts that aren't hard to understand, like the 6 sword combination technique, the concentrated wind sword technique, the plum blossom sword technique, and the sword of 1,000 aromas. After learning those 3 techniques, it then becomes possible to reach the secrets of the plum blossom sword. And only then can one begin learning the greatest martial technique in the sect, known as Manhwa's signature technique. Devouring the book, Hui says the driving force behind the group that became one of the most renowned lies in the secrets of these sword styles. And rumor has it that the best swordsman in the sect mastered more than one of the 3 plum blossom sword techniques. Since the first technique is the roots, the next 3 are the trunk, and the secrets form the branches. Finally, in the Sword of 7 Flowers, the 3-edged sword and the lucid plum blossom sword are the flowers of the tree. Closing the book, the protagonist concludes that he has reached the trunk, and even if he wanted to reach the branches, he would need the plum blossom sword, which is given only to those recognized as martial arts masters. As he says something out loud, someone asks if he's referring to the plum blossom sword. It's Bakyu, who arrived quietly. Our boy stands up and greets the sect leader. The man says he came to see why someone had been there for so long, then asks if the protagonist minds if he sits for a bit. Naturally, Wei says he doesn't, while thinking to himself that he hadn't noticed how late it was, and that Gak had lit candles for him. Intrigued, Yu asks if the young man really read all that. Our boy says yes. The man then says he's heard about the changes in the disciples' training and asks if he's the instructor. Once again, the protagonist confirms. Curious, the leader questions why he's focusing on the 6 sword combination technique. Thinking, the man recalls how Hui used to hesitate even with simple questions, but now he's doing things he never did before. Meanwhile, the protagonist starts to suspect that the man is probably there just to check how things are going after Hyun's death, and whether he's faking being okay. So it's better to give you the answer he wants. Before going straight to the point, the protagonist repeats the question, then states that he's doing what he's doing because the second-generation disciples started off on the wrong foot, and it would have been better if they had never started at all. Despite the leader's shocked expression, our boy thinks he must already know how terrible the disciples are, so he'll probably believe they think alike, which will work in his favor. The problem is that what he doesn't know is that he was thinking Hui's condition is far worse than he imagined. Confused, the leader wonders if the child in front of him is the same one he used to know, since Hui was very innocent and would never speak ill of anyone. With his head spinning, the man wonders if this change is due to everything that happened. But before he can say anything, the protagonist says everyone already knows. Without understanding anything, the elder asks what he's talking about. Our boy then says that all second-generation disciples are well familiar with the six-sword combination technique. However, if they compare everyone's performance from when they were still learning, they'll see that things have only gotten worse. Intrigued, Yu asks what the reason for that would be. Explaining, Hui says that sects and clans in Jianghu have different views and ideologies. These naturally blend with martial arts, so a sect's martial school is an expression of that organization's ideology. For example, the Taiji Fist of the Wuning sect and its enlightened sword art, or the Crimson Dawn strike of Qinqing sect's Azure Cloud. That's why learning a martial arts school is not just about training the body, but also exploring and understanding the sect's ideology. Without showing much reaction, the elder can only think about how calm the young man is. He greatly resembles Hyunjo. Still explaining, the protagonist says the second-generation disciples are focused solely on making the plum blossom bloom. Yu then asks could he propose to change that. Without hesitation, the protagonist says he needs to make everyone realize that learning the sect's signature technique is not the true purpose of a martial school, but rather to train endlessly in order to explore and understand the ideology and then apply it to daily life. That's why the plum blossom isn't exactly the end of everything. The elder's eyes widen as he realizes how much Huai resembles the deceased disciple, not in appearance, but in wisdom. Yu wonders if he's the only one who can see the talent in that child. Agreeing with everything the protagonist said, the man remarks that he thinks very deeply despite being so young. Hui then says he now intends to guide the disciples in training with the six-sword combination technique. Baek says he has no doubt the boy will do well, but would like to know what path he intends to follow. The question catches our boy off guard. Thinking, he says that after studying the martial arts of Mount Hua's sect, he realized they're all good. But he also found some things disappointing, like the fact that they prioritize being strong only for survival, or the fact that they don't use combat tactics or heavier, larger swords. Even trying to hold back, the protagonist concludes that he won't be able to, even if it shocks him. Out loud, he lies and simply says he doesn't want to walk a very grand path, because he intends to do the things his master wanted to do and take his place. After all, continuing on his master's path and surpassing him is a disciple's duty. Shocked, Yu says he understands, referring to seeing Hyun in Hawaii, which is not because of the boy's talent, but because of his will to follow his master's path. Thinking, he says that creating a new martial technique is no easy task. Still, he is very proud of the young man standing before him. Smiling, he says out loud that Hyun would surely be proud, and our boy thanks him. The man then reflects that his worries have turned into hope, stating next that the winter snow is cold, but the scent of the plum blossoms that endure the cold and bloom is much stronger. And even if he wasn't able to protect the plum blossoms that bloomed on Mount Hua, a small bud remained, so from that moment on, his duty would be to make that bud bloom. Out of nowhere, Yu says aloud that there are many other flowers besides the plum blossom on Mount Hua. Then he asks if the boy knows why they chose that one in particular. The protagonist says he doesn't. Being mysterious, the elder says he'll learn a lot if he reflects on that. He quickly gets up to leave. After taking a few steps, Yu says he forgot to mention something. He then reveals that he also lost his master, but even so, he can't say he fully understands Hui's sorrow. However, the boy shouldn't think of Hyun's death as an end, but rather as a beginning to do what he would have wanted. In silence, the protagonist thinks that actually isn't such a bad idea. He then thanks him for the conversation filled with wisdom. Alone, Dago remembers the past when someone said he looked very fragile. Aside from being arrogant and reckless, which are two perfect qualities when it comes to building muscle, the mysterious man then asks if he wants to try a new way of training. We return to the present moment, where in the morning the protagonist seems to be training in the way that man taught him. Thinking, he says he didn't expect his encounter with the Iron Fist King of the Mountain to be so useful, since he taught him a pretty rough but very effective training method that will show results in no time. Suddenly, someone yells and says it's time. Not understanding anything, our boy asks what the girl is talking about. With her eyes shining, the young woman says that the sect leader asked for him to come down the mountain. We see the Elder's Temple, where someone says the next edition is about the third-generation disciples. Yu, agreeing, says the problem is they didn't have time to select such disciples because of the Shaanxi massacre. One of the elders then says it would be interesting to accept some disciples from external sects to show that they are doing well. Neither agreeing nor disagreeing, another man asks if it wouldn't be better to send a disciple to check on the external sector of Shaanxi, since another unorthodox alliance or evil organization is probably trying to fill a power vacuum. We learn that external sects are located outside the martial halls created to teach the martial arts of Mount Hua's sect. That's why the influence of an external sect comes from the fame and achievements of the main sect. In thought, Yu says it makes sense for the external sects to be more anxious after what happened. But first, they need to choose which disciple to send. Taking initiative, the leader says this matter can no longer be postponed. He then suggests that they send a second-generation disciple. Concerned, San says the outside world is still a mess. He then says that in that case, they can choose some of the most talented disciples, including Huidi. Smiling, Jin says he likes the idea. But everyone is shocked that you mentioned the boy. San says he doesn't really like the idea of sending the young man, but the leader says he's changed a lot over the past month, and he's certain the boy will be fine. We're taken to the city of Posen, where the protagonist and 3 other disciples meet. Thinking, our boy says it's a small town, with nothing interesting except for the alcohol. Suddenly, the long-haired girl calls his attention to show him a chicken dish. Yes, apparently they've never eaten chicken that way. Jin then tells Muhwa not to forget that they're wearing the Mount Huasek's uniform while she drools. The girl says she got it, but quickly adds that now she smells lamb. Then she asks how they could not want such good food. Suddenly, someone bumps hard into Hua. Her big eyes widen in surprise. Quickly, everyone starts staring at the rude guy. Hua raises his arm and Jin asks what he's doing. The man then asks if it's the first time those plum blossoms are in Jingshu. He then says the girl should apologize since she bumped into him. Hua shouts that he was the one who bumped into her, while the protagonist thinks those guys must be from some criminal organization, probably the one that took over the power vacuum left by the external sect of Shaanxi. Even so, it doesn't make sense for them to be that rude unless they have the backing of someone powerful. Not wanting to get directly involved, the protagonist concludes that learning to deal with that kind of people will be good for his students. He then decides to take action and show how it's done. Pointing his sword at one of the men's eyes, he asks where he thinks he's looking. He then says he knew from the start that it was the man who bumped into the girl, but he preferred to wait and see how the guy would act, and since he was rude, he picked a fight with the Mount Hua sect. Catching the guys by surprise, the protagonist adds that now he understands what Jingshu's underworld thinks about the sect. Sweating nervously, one of the men apologizes, but our boy says he doesn't accept apologies from scum like him, and that if he wants to stop his ally from losing an eye, he better get out of the way right now. Mouth wide open, the man thinks that apparently the boy really will attack. Boy narrows his eyes and keeps staring, making the group run off with their tails between their legs. Hua apologizes, and as he puts his sword away, the protagonist says she doesn't need to apologize since it was the man who was at fault. And since he knows everyone must be surprised by the situation, he'd like to suggest they find an inn first to eat something. The girl and another disciple are happy with the idea, but Jin remains silent, thinking about how he was the first to apologize for his friend, even though it was those men who started everything. All because he was too worried about how they should behave. Unlike Hui, who seems aware of everything happening around him and reacted like he's used to that kind of situation, even if he's just pretending. Meanwhile, our boy can only think that he should have stabbed the man. Not knowing anything, Jin promises to himself that he'll work harder so that something like this doesn't happen again, and so that no one else will look down on them. The group arrives at the inn, and the protagonist immediately rushes to order a bunch of things, making the waitress nervous. A few minutes later, we see a pile of empty dishes and Hua who looks completely stuffed. Our boy asks if Chiel ate less because of the training, but he replies that actually he just ate too much. Curious, Hua asks what else they're going to do that day since the sect leader didn't say what the goal was. Then after the protagonist asks what notable things had happened so far, she remembers everything they've done. With wide eyes, the girl recalls the underworld. Hui then says that since the leader gave them full authority, he was thinking of teaching a lesson to the underworld bastards. Night quickly falls in the city, and still inside the inn, the group plans how to carry out the mission. Jin says it's better for them to gather some intel on the men before doing anything. Everyone seems to agree with the boy's idea. So the protagonist asks the trio to gather all the information they can about the underworld by the following night. Meanwhile, he'll walk around the city in disguise and move stealthily. We're taken to the underworld, a place where those who commit immoral acts and hold twisted beliefs or thoughts reside. However, there is a difference between the underworld dwellers and the many martial artists among the orthodox forces, including demonic ones. One of the men surrounding a woman says the interest rate recently went up, but they forgot to mention that, so she can pay with something else. From this, we learn that the underworld people are after money, pleasure, or simply the cheap thrill of domination, and they resemble the organizations that kill for profit. Thus, the underworld refers to thugs who live their lives in a cheap and filthy way. Wrapped in a large cloak, Hui says he doesn't know if those men are arrogant or just ignorant. Surprised, one of the guys asks who he is and where Zhengbang is, since he was supposed to be on watch. Another man says he probably went out wandering around, but we see that's not exactly true. Coldly, the protagonist asks who they believe in to act like that. Confused, the bald guy questions whether the boy is trying to start a fight, but if not, he should just turn around and take his nosy ass out of there. Covering his face, our boy says he came to find them for a different reason. The long-haired man asks what the hell he's talking about. But before he can say anything else, he takes a knee to the face. That sends him flying. Mouth open, the bald guy asks why the boy did that. Without saying a word, Hui starts beating up the man already on the ground, until he leaves him completely unconscious. The woman takes the chance to free herself, and leaves the bald man alone. The protagonist then says he seems to have learned some third-rate martial arts, so he'd like to see him in action. But if he wants to live, he can just hand over his wallet. Elsewhere, we see another guy peeing. Sitting at a table, two men ask if he's going to do that all the time, saying they'll both be sober by the time he's done. Rolling his eyes, the old man finishes what he's doing and says it's really annoying. And neither he nor the two notice that there are two dead men tied to a tree. The men only comment that a guy in a cloak was there a few minutes ago, took a bunch of food to go. We're taken back to the city, where Hua talks with a local in search of information. Trying another strategy, Chiul hides behind a wall to eavesdrop on conversations. Meanwhile, Jin pretends to be just a guy having a drink so he can spy up close. Far from there, in another area, someone comments that they smell pork and spring rolls. A mustached man says he doesn't know who that bastard is, but he must be crazy to show up there with food. Unable to control themselves, people begin advancing toward Huai, who draws his sword and slashes the air, saying he's not there to share food, so anyone who tries to touch the bags will regret it. One of the men says the boy is truly impressive, and apologizing, introduces himself as So Jinga from the Beggar's Sect. Our boy puts his sword away and introduces himself as well. The man then says that his sect considers what happened to the Sword Saint of Mount Hua a disgrace. He then asks what brings him there. Getting straight to the point, the protagonist says he wants to know more about the underworld dwellers. And since the food will go bad if it gets cold, it should talk while eating. Laughing, Jinga says that's interesting. Sometime later, Huai learns that the underworld people belong to the Blood Brutal faction, which took over the power vacuum left by the Hoari sect and the external branch of the Hua sect. The leader of the Beggar's Sect says what sets them apart is that the people in this faction actually know martial arts techniques. Our boy says he understands, but now they need to talk about what's truly important. Like, for example, who is behind the faction. Intrigued, the old man asks why he thinks there's someone powerful behind the organization. Explaining, our boy says he thinks that because Posing is quite large compared to other places, and yet a mere faction managed to monopolize the city, which means someone clever is very interested in the power vacuum. After all, what would be normal is for dozens of underworld organizations to divide control over parts of the city and compete with each other. Shocked, Jinga says it's hard to believe the boy is just a rising disciple new to Jianghu. He then says he hadn't brought it up earlier because he needed to be sure of something. Wai says he can speak now. Obeying, the beggar reveals that there's a martial artist who frequently contacts the Blood Brutal faction, and that this person belongs to the Gayu Sword Sect. We learn that this is one of the major organizations in Shaanxi, but even though it's powerful, it's never cared about Mount Hua Sect or the Zhongnan Sect, and is also smaller than those two. Thinking, the protagonist says something still feels off. Jinga says he's not certain the mastermind is in the Guyu Sword Sect. Agreeing, our boy says that if that were the case, they wouldn't care about appearances, so he doesn't believe the sect is truly involved. But even so, he's curious to know who the martial artist is. The beggar then says you forgot to mention that he suspects the Red Wolf sword belongs to the Gayu Sword Sect. And judging by the boy's reaction, it seems he's heard that name before, so it's best to be careful before doing anything. In his thoughts, Huai reveals that, in truth, he's never heard of this person before. The next day at the inn, we see the protagonist thinking as he looks out the window. We learn that even after a long conversation, he didn't gather much information about the Red Wolf sword. We go back to earlier moments when he asked Jinga if the liquid in the cup was really just tea, while thinking it would only take a little playfulness with the man to extract more details. However, he didn't consider one important factor, which was the incredible taste of that wine. Laughing, the beggar says it seems like he liked it, and it doesn't even seem like it's his first time in Jianghu. After that, our boy forgot everything and kept drinking, so he didn't get the information he needed. And even though he has a rough idea of how he'll act, he doesn't know what choices the enemies will make. He then concludes that he still has some time to enjoy the wine he brought to the room. Night quickly falls, and we see the other three disciples. Wondering what that smell of alcohol is, in front of them stands Hui. Crossing his arms, he asks what they found out. Stepping forward, Hua says she first liked to know if he was there drinking while they were working. Our boy says no and repeats his previous question. Jin says they found out the underworld dwellers fill the power vacuum and now control Posung. Hua adds that they're all wicked, always turning to violence to get what they want. Chiul then says the problem is that they've learned martial arts, which even if third-rate, are still very dangerous when used against people who don't know how to fight. The protagonist praises the trio for the good work, revealing that he also discovered something they need to pay close attention to, which is how the underworld people learn martial arts. After all, they're people who would never touch a book. They'd rather use the pages as firewood, which means someone taught them. Standing up, our boy says he found out who's responsible, but not the reason why. Curious, Jin asks who the person is. Getting straight to the point, Hui says it's the Red Wolf sword, from the Nine Hells Sword Sect. Shocked, Jin wonders how they're not just dealing with a few criminals. Sitting down again, the protagonist says he was thinking of setting up an ambush to wipe them out. Hearing that leaves the long-haired boy speechless. Chiul then says he also doesn't know why the sect would be helping criminals, but it'd be better to inform the elders first. Without showing much reaction, the protagonist asks if he's sure about that. Going against her companions, Guo says she agrees with the senior disciple, since they need to face the problem head-on. Even though he disagrees, Jim remains silent, thinking they need to consider the current situation. Since Mount Hua is overwhelmed with recovering from the massacre, and entering another conflict could make things worse. Deciding to speak up, the boy says doing that is very dangerous, because it could start another war with the powerful sect. Hui says he understands his concern, but that none of that will happen, because that's not how the Nine Hells Sword Sect operates. After all, they would start a fight if they wanted to eliminate an organization, rather than doing everything in secret. And with Mount Hua's current state, they could invade and wipe them out at any moment. That's why he believes the criminals aren't truly connected to the sect, and even if they are, they won't start a war with Mount Hua. Jin tries to say something else, but our boy doesn't let him. Even so, the boy asks if the information he got is reliable. The protagonist says yes, because he spoke with people from the beggar's sect. With wide eyes, the disciple wonders if he really means the sect that accepts any beggar as a member, being the largest organization in terms of numbers, that uses its numerical advantage to obtain food and information, and also knows martial arts, which means any information that comes from them is trustworthy. Heading toward their destination, Jin concludes that he's worrying for nothing, since Wade promised he'd try to resolve things peacefully. Our boy tells everyone to get ready, while thinking that he can't show he's anxious or he'll become a burden, so it's better to go all in. After seeing the boy break the gate with a kick, Jin wonders what happened to the peaceful approach idea. Inside, the criminals ask what the hell is going on. Stepping forward, the protagonist says it's great that they're all gathered there, then asks for someone to inform the Red Wolf Sword and the organization's leader to come outside, kneel, and apologize if they want to keep their lives. Seeing the symbol on the protagonist's sword, the criminals realize they're dealing with people from Mount Hua sect. Jin and Hua say they didn't find that entrance very peaceful, but Kui says that's the right way to handle things in Jianghu. Suddenly, someone appears asking what all the noise is. One of the criminals tells the old man that Mount Hua sect's people are there. Thinking to himself, the old man wonders if that's really possible, as he stares at the quartet standing in front of him. Realizing they're just kids, the old man asks if they're trying to die, then states that he'll let it slide because they're with an important guest. The protagonist then says, actually, they're the ones who'll die if they keep talking in that tone. Shocked, the man says that if he knew who his people were messing with, he'd be more careful with his words. He then orders the group to show the quartet just how terrifying the Jianghu can be, but without killing anyone. The men quickly take position and draw their swords. However, something catches Hua's attention. Up ahead, the young woman sees what appears to be an injured couple, with the man holding the woman in his arms. That's the final straw for the disciple, who charges in without a second thought to try to save those poor people. We see that the man, severely wounded, is no longer breathing, but the woman still has her eyes closed. The rest of the disciples immediately rush over to Hua, because two criminals are about to attack her. Showing she's not weak, the girl unleashes her bamboo leaf hand technique, which sends the enemies flying. Approaching, Jin says she can't just run off like that. Shouting, Hua says they need to get those people to a doctor. Standing up, one of the men asks who said she could do that. He then states that even though they're from Mount Hua, there are still few of them. Just one coordinated attack would be enough to defeat them. The shouting draws the attention of the gang leader. Thinking to himself, the protagonist concludes that the girl had been hiding her true strength during training. He then orders Hua to pick up her sword and wipe the floor with everyone there, instead of using the weapon as decoration. Meanwhile, the leader of the criminals wonders why the boy didn't run in to help like the others. He concludes that the boy must be confident so he won't dare face him alone, but will help the others so they can all fight together. Huai says that even though the man ran in, he wasn't really the one he wanted. However, since it's his student's first time in Jianghu, it means no one here knows anything, much less that criminals fight dirty and spit on their opponents, since winning is all that matters. But this time, there's no one to protect them, which means the trio will have to learn that life and death in Jianghu aren't decided purely by martial cultivation. Without moving a muscle, our boy reveals that this is nothing more than one of his lessons. He then notices that things seem to be different for Chiel. We see the boy stop an opponent with just one hand and leave another one visibly shaken. Even so, the bald man decides to attack with his sword, but he's blocked too, and after taking the hit, falls completely unconscious to the ground. Kill gives a dark glare to the criminal who was watching the fight. Suddenly, the gang leader charges toward Huai, saying that apparently he's the easiest opponent, so he'll take care of him first. Unluckily for him, with a single strike, our boy slams half his body into a hole in the ground. Shocked, the other criminals see the leader is down, and start asking what they're supposed to do now. Suddenly, someone says all they have to do is pick another leader, anyone who can kill the Mount Hua brats. Our quartet realizes that this is the man known as the Red Wolf Sword. Mocking, the protagonist says he was wondering when the pretty boy would show up. Surprised, the old man asks if the boy knows him, then says that being recognized by a young Mount Hua disciple is an honor. Huai then says that actually he only heard about him yesterday, and apologizing, adds that he doesn't bother learning the names of the weak. The old man says that a disciple of Mount Hua should follow the orthodox path, but the boy speaks like a demonic martial artist. Still, if that's how he wants to act, so be it. Jumping down from the balcony, the Red Wolf Sword says the protagonist will just have to give it his all to win. Holding his sword, our boy asks what he means by give it his all, because he's not sure if the man is even strong enough to handle that. Surprised, the old man asks when the boy got behind him, but takes a heavy hit instead of getting an answer. To avoid crashing to the ground like a sack of potatoes, he uses his sword's sheath to leap into the air. Thinking to himself, he wonders what the hell that speed was, since he didn't even see the boy's feet move. And the most impressive part is that the boy didn't even use his sword. Trying to understand, the old man concludes there's no way a young disciple could be at a higher level than him. Meanwhile, Boy can only think that there's nothing special preventing him from finishing off the Red Wolf's sword, especially now since he wants to test his sword. After all, it's been a month since he's been training and researching the combination of Manhwa's martial arts. Even though there's been no one who could assess his progress and performance, that's why the old man in front of him becomes so valuable. Because even if he's not strong enough, he's still something. Without hesitation, the white-haired man charges forward, but the protagonist dodges like it's the easiest thing in the world. And after ducking to avoid another strike, he takes the opportunity to counter using the bamboo leaf hand, which sends the man flying as he keeps charging ahead. After closing the distance, our boy delivers another blow, leaving his opponent completely stunned. Trying to regain balance, the man wonders how the boy read his movements. He then concludes that that's why he couldn't keep up with the young man's actions, which means that maybe they really are on different levels, whether he wants to admit or not. Raising his sword, the old man says he acknowledges that the boy is not just some talented youngster and apologizes for having underestimated him, stating right after that now he will go all out. Our boy remains still as his opponent approaches. Stopping midway, the man launches an attack that shows why he's known as the Red Wolf's sword. Seeing what's happening, the trio of disciples becomes worried for why. But with a single strike of his sword, our boy makes the great wolf vanish. He then states that the technique the man used is fierce, but has many openings. And judging by the way he used it, he hasn't even learned the second half. Stammering, the old man asks how the young one knows that technique. But it seems to be too late, as Wei is already closing like a flash, forcing him to stretch himself thin trying to defend. Even though he's confused, the man is sure he blocked the attack, but quickly realizes the boy used the illusory sword technique, that being his last thought, before strawberry juice goes flying, leaving the criminals in disbelief. However, we find out the protagonist didn't kill his opponent, he only cut his hair and cheek. With wide eyes, the man tries to understand why he spared him, and why he hadn't used his sword from the beginning. Even so, he decides those things no longer matter, because now he must figure out how the boy can be so strong and so young at the same time, and so talented. Even more than him despite being older. Angry, the Red Wolf's sword orders Quinn not to look down on him, because he's dealing with a martial artist from the Nine Hells sword sect. Other wolves appear and charge toward the protagonist, who quickly counters with his sword to defend himself, then strikes at the old man across the battlefield. Everyone stops to witness the scene, as the white-haired man loses balance and screams, thinking he was already training when the boy was born and continued practicing to be acknowledged for his martial arts. But now the young one has shattered his years of effort like they were nothing. Charging forward in fury, the man yells, asking why his efforts aren't recognized by Huai, but takes another slash and doesn't get an answer. After several minutes with his head stuck in a hole, the leader of the criminals finally regains consciousness. Terrified, he starts coughing, then asks what the hell happened. Looking ahead, he sees the Red Wolf's sword screaming, before being struck directly in the neck. Wounded, the man can only express shock. On the ground, the old man thinks that nothing is as unfair as talent, because all of his efforts became a victim of a boy's talent, who surely trained only a few hours a day. Unlike him, a martial artist from the Nine Hells sword sect. Huai watches, confused as his opponent laughs and rambles. The old man then says the boy must be used to getting attention, and that defeating him will only make him more well-known. So he should enjoy it while it lasts, since in the end he'll die just like him, because the sect will come after whoever is responsible for his death. The protagonist mocks him, saying that for someone on the verge of death, he sure talks a lot, and kicking the old man to roll him over, says that the way he speaks sounds like someone who feels inferior, which makes sense for someone who's a member of the Otherworld unit. We learn that the Nine Hells sword sect is divided into the Otherworld unit, the Hell unit, and the Despair unit, known as the three axes that support the sect. However, the Otherworld unit received no merits and is the weakest of them all, which means they were only eyeing Southern Shanxi, because the unit's mission during the war against the brutal dragon faction was to guard headquarters and provide backup. But the members of the unit seeking merits started faking mission reports. After hearing all this, the old man asks how the protagonist knows everything. Without answering, he says the man must think that the Otherworld unit will avenge his death, but unfortunately, they'll do nothing but cover it up, since this would be the perfect opportunity for the other two units to crush the Otherworld unit. With a dark look, our boy says that even if they climb Mount Hua seeking revenge, he would never fear such a weak unit, since he was the one who once faced the Nine Hells sword sect alone. Hearing this makes the old man widen his eyes, and it also catches the attention of the criminal's leader, who decides to bury his head back down, while no one has yet noticed that he's awake. Thinking, he says he didn't see anything. But suddenly, a hand grabs his clothes. It's Hui, who effortlessly lifts the man, then asks why the hell he was still lying down instead of handling things. Frightened, the gang leader says he'll do whatever he's told. A few minutes later, inside the criminal's house, the protagonist and the other disciples read the notebooks containing records of the gang's activities. With everyone subdued, he asks if that's really all they do. The leader says yes. Our boy then says that from that moment on, the stolen money will be returned to its rightful owners. And, in addition, they must get rid of the gambling den that very night. even if they're scared. The man with the big forehead says doing all that in one night will be kind of hard. But upon seeing the expression on Hui's face, he simply says they'll figure it out. The protagonist says he's actually wrong about one thing, because the reason he didn't kill them all isn't mercy, but rather so the victims have someone to take their anger out on, since the sin they committed is heavier than death itself. Therefore, they'll all have to live serving those they harmed for the rest of their lives. With the instructions given, Hui says that except for the faction leader, the others may leave to carry out their tasks. Curious, Hua asks what our boy is going to do while the others watch over the criminals. The protagonist simply says he has unfinished business, and the girl then asks if he's going to drink again. Embarrassed, he asks the girl to go keep an eye on the men. She says they'll be fine and that they'll go right away. Thinking, our boy says the girl understands faster than he expected. But this time, he's not interested in drinking. Confused, the faction leader asks why he had to stay standing up. Why says he can't fool his nose and must guide him to the place where the wolf tuber flower is located. We find out that in his past life, Dako wandered around searching for rare items since he didn't have a sect to rely on and needed a lot of money, which he also had to find a way to earn on his own. However, rare items are called that for a reason. They're not easy to find until one day, while resting, he discovered the tuber flower, which had a bitter and dirty smell that was unforgettable. Going down the stairs, he notices the aroma getting stronger and stronger, while the leader says that the flower is 200 years old and was supposed to be taken by the Red Wolf's sword, but now it's found a more fitting master. The protagonist says he did a good job, but can leave now. Alone, he thinks that with iron doors and stone walls, he won't need to worry about practicing energy circulation, and even though a 200-year-old flower isn't that great, it doesn't change the fact that it's very valuable. Opening a small box, Hui says it's time to enjoy a 200-year walk. But upon a closer look, he realizes the wolf flower is much bigger than he imagined, which means it must be at least 400 years old. Holding the flower in his hand, he says he never imagined finding it so easily. And since it doesn't feel right to consume it all alone, he'll share the next item he finds. Sometime later, still at the criminal's house, something catches the gang leader's attention, who gets up from the table to see what's going on through the window. Suddenly, a pair of boots appears through the dust, and we see that it's Huai, a paramedic training. Confused, the man runs to the boy and says he heard a very loud noise. Playing it off, the protagonist says it was nothing important, then asks if he's checking the book carefully. The man says yes, and that he was on that task just a few minutes ago. Leaving, Wei says he'll check later to make sure all the money was returned properly. After bowing and with the protagonist walking away, the man says he really is a damn bastard. Besides being a liar, since he said the noise wasn't important, even though he destroyed a building. Thinking, the man wonders what the wolf flower did to the boy to make that happen. Still in the same night, we see the criminals wielding sledgehammers, while being watched by Chil, who, upon seeing one of the men standing still, asks if he's really sure there's time to rest. On the other side, Huo orders another guy to hurry, since the sun is about to rise. Elsewhere, someone asks in surprise if the man is really giving that away as a gift. Bowing, the criminal says that this is the money they extorted unfairly hidden a bit further away. Jinga thinks he never imagined Hui would be capable of doing all that in just 2 days, and that he already expected the young man who asked for the information to be unusual. But this is too much, because Mount Huo was actually hiding a dragon. Suddenly, our boy appears behind him, saying he's there to have a drink because he got hungry but didn't want to do it alone. So he'd like to invite the man to join him as well, even though he's surprised to be invited to drink alcohol first thing in the morning. Jinga accepts the invitation. Sometime later, he asks what the boy is curious about. Explaining the whole situation, our boy says the current problem is the underworld branches of the Brutal Blood faction, who only turned to crime because they had no other way to survive, so he wants to rehabilitate them all. But he needs someone willing to take them in. Huai adds that the man doesn't need to worry because he'll handle everything, including the breaking of the Dantians. The leader of the beggar faction says the boy never stops surprising him, and that he knows some merchants who can take care of the underworld folks, and besides that, he'll keep an eye on things. Our boy thanks him, but the man says he's the one who should be thankful for being invited to help civilians. Changing the subject, Jinga asks how long Hui will stay in Posum. He says about 3 days. Curious, the man asks if he's planning to deal with the fortresses around the city. The protagonist says maybe later that same night. We see the city is quite lively. The inn, our boy offers drinks to his students and praises them for a job well done. Surprised, Jin asks what that is. Huai then says he prepared bamboo leaf liquor to congratulate everyone. The boy says they don't drink, but the protagonist says that actually it's allowed when there's something to celebrate. And since many new disciples tend to die during their first real incident, they should celebrate the fact that they're still alive, especially after fighting people who had the intent to kill, unlike them, who, from that moment on, must always remember that life and death aren't decided by one's level in martial arts, so they don't end up having a tragic end like many rookies who ignore that fact. Smiling, the protagonist says now it's time to drink. Jin asks if that wasn't also his first incident. Lying, our boy says it was. And in that case, everyone should raise a glass for completing their first incident in Jiangsu safely. Hua says the liquor is delicious, and the long-haired boy agrees. The girl then says now she understands why Hui loves drinking alcohol so much. Without saying a word, Chul thinks about the sword technique the protagonist used earlier, which definitely wasn't from Mount Hua, meaning he needs to find out where it's from. Out loud, the boy says he has a question for Hui about the technique he used during the battle with the Red Wolf sword. Since his sword transformed into something he'd never seen before, it had concentrated power and curves that weren't smooth. Thinking, our boy says he thought everyone would be focused on the other enemies instead of watching him. Using the sword technique that contains the principle of weight, which is one of the principles he invented in his past life. With his head spinning, he tries to understand how the boy noticed such a subtle change in movement, saying out loud that he'll explain more about it, but not at that moment because there's something they need to do. After they finish drinking, of course, since after they hear what he has to say, they won't have time to drink for the next 3 days. Elsewhere, we see a carriage in the forest. Suddenly, someone orders the driver to stop the vehicle immediately. The man asks what's going on, coming out from the bushes. An old man says it's nothing serious, but the man must hand over everything he has if he wants to stay alive. We see that a bit farther away, the Golden Quartet is observing the entire situation. Hui then says the bandits hide in the forest until someone passes by. And even if they seem to be part of the underworld, they're different because they've learned martial arts and are more organized. Since the previous criminals only learned martial arts because the Red Wolf sword had a goal to fulfill. But these guys are structured, and if they're here, it's because there's a fortress nearby. Hua says she understands and asks why Hui is telling them all this. Our boy then says it's because for the next 3 days, they will eradicate every fortress that exists, and each one will have the chance to take down one of the structures alone while the others watch. The trio is quite surprised. Worried, the girl asks why he made that decision, and if it was because they did something wrong. The protagonist asks what she means because they know they almost died due to being unable to take down the underworld figures, mainly because they weren't ready to harm other people, which they'll have to do on this mission. Sheol agrees and says that, in fact, they could have died if it weren't for Hui. Jin then asks how the protagonist prepared himself to kill others. In his thoughts, our boy reflects on how he wishes he could share about his first real fight, which happened a long time ago, but is still something you don't easily forget, because he was young and terrified, afraid that if he didn't kill, he would die. Snapping out of it, he says he was afraid they get hurt, so he killed the enemy to prevent their fears from becoming reality. Jin decides not to say anything else after hearing that. The protagonist then says everyone must have their own reasons to fight. He then states that he'll teach the sword technique to Chil, depending on how he handles the fortress. And since this is the first night, he'll show how it's done himself. After a few minutes, we see the bandit with his face shoved in a hole in the ground. Hui lifts him up and takes the chance to slap him a few more times to wake the man up and make him show the way. Thus, after some time, he quickly reaches the fortress. The bandits are shocked when they see the scene, but suddenly, we see everyone on the ground unconscious, while Hui dusts off his clothes, marking the beginning of 3 days of special training, where in the morning they watch over the brutal blood faction, and at night, they deal with the fortresses. We find out the training was effective, even though at first the disciples hesitated. But after a few fights, they seem to learn something because they stopped hesitating quickly and did very well handling the fortresses, with Mujin being the only one who seemed to need more time. Thinking, our boy says the young man is much better than the other two, but still hesitates to kill, even when being attacked, which means he's more afraid of hurting others than of dying, something the protagonist can't change, since the boy must overcome that on his own. After just 2 days, we find out the quartet completed all the fortresses. The protagonist praises everyone for the good work and announces they'll now head to Wainan as planned. Hua asks why they can't go that night, and Wei says it's because he promised Kiel he'd teach the technique, then states that everyone can stay too if they want to learn. Without hesitation, the protagonist begins the demonstration, while his students watch without blinking. Since they're too shocked to even do that, the protagonist then says that, as the boy saw, the technique is Mount Hua's 6 combo, which he modified by adding more weight. He'll ask what he means by weight, explaining our boy says Mount Hua's sword techniques allow someone to move to the next attack, even when blocked, which means it can be combined with any other technique, and also makes it possible to mix in elements of illusion. The disciple remains stunned, but Hui says they all should already know about the sword saint of Mount Hua. Even if the man wasn't the first to do this, he was the best, which means he also had deep martial knowledge, to the point that maybe the flamboyant shift and the plum blossom were combinations of the 6th sword, which differ based on the amount of weight applied. That's why Mount Hua's techniques are incomplete. They don't study the sword's weight deeply enough, and learning a new technique that was never finished when one already has a solid foundation can be foolish, something Kenjo knew and practiced in secret, since an incomplete technique could end up causing chaos. After all this beautiful explanation, Hui asks Shiel if that was the technique he wanted to learn. After a few minutes in silence, the boy lifts his head and says yes, then asks him to teach him. We find out that Shiel's training continued throughout the entire night until dawn. Exhausted, Hua wonders how much longer she'll have to keep watch, then calls Jin's attention to suggest they run off from there, focus on the training. Hui says the boy has been wielding the sword using the principle of illusion, instead of focusing on the principle of weight and the difference in how to use the sword. Sweating, Chiel says he understands. In the background, we see the two who were on watch have already taken off, deciding to go check on the underworld folks and get some rest. We're taken to the city, where an irritated man tells another to walk faster, because at that pace they won't be able to accomplish anything. Looking around, Juan notices there are no problems to handle, concluding that, in fact, the underworld people just needed a chance to change their lives. However, she then thinks maybe they're only behaving because they know they're being watched by her and by Mu Jin, who is elsewhere. Even so, the girl decides to stop worrying and get some rest, since she worked hard these past few days. Suddenly, someone calls her attention. Startled, she strikes a combat pose while drawing her sword, but to her complete surprise, she comes face to face with the woman who was injured in the brutal Blood Factions building. The woman apologizes for scaring her, firmly holding the hand of a little girl. Then, she asks her younger sister, Yum Yum, to say hi. Embarrassed, Hua asks how the woman is doing. Without answering, the woman thanks her for saving her brother, bringing tears to the disciple's eyes. The woman then says her wounds healed quickly, and that thanks to the young lady, they were able to hold their father's funeral. Wiping her eyes, the girl asks what she means by father, recalling briefly the man who was dead when she arrived. Hua apologizes for not arriving in time and says she hopes he rests in peace. The woman says she doesn't need to apologize because they're truly grateful. Suddenly, Yun Young starts stammering something with her cute little voice, then says that one day she'll become an impressive knight. Hearing that breaks Hua's heart and she can't hold back the tears. Not understanding, the woman asks why the young lady is crying. But the disciple says that surely the little girl will become a very strong warrior, even stronger than her. The woman asks if Hua is feeling any pain since she's crying, but she says that's not it. The day quickly passes, giving way to night. Somewhere indoors, Mu Jin doesn't seem to be doing very well, judging by the expression on his face. We move to the next day, where Hua, sweating, roasts her head under the sun. Shouting, she asks why Hui is walking so fast. Our boy says that, actually, she's the one who got too relaxed after resting for a day, which means she didn't train properly. The girl simply says they should have left earlier instead of resting like he ordered. After getting a sharp look, the disciple realizes she said too much. Breaking the tense mood, Jin says he was surprised to see that the underworld people in Posen are doing well. Furious, the protagonist says what they really need to worry about is that weak mindset they have, showing that Jin's strategy to change the subject has failed. Suddenly, Hua says she misses Young Young, who is the younger sister of a girl she saved during the brutal blood attack. Excited, Hua says the little one said she wants to become an amazing knight fighter like her when she grows up. Mocking, our boy says it's the first time he's ever cared about a kid's future. And when the girl tries to talk back, he tells her to shut up, because they finally arrived in Weinan, thankfully before sunset. Jin then says there's an external sect of Mount Hua in the city called the Fresh Flower Sect. Hua says that, in that case, they should head there for dinner. Quickly, the quartet arrives at the sect's headquarters and come across a group of boys, beating mercilessly on another gray-haired boy. One of the boys punches the one being held right in the stomach, but as he raises his arm to land the next blow, he's stopped by someone's hand, grabbing the boy's wrist. Hua says that a little kid is hitting someone using a lot of internal energy. The boy looks to the side and realizes there's more than one adult there. The boy who was getting beaten quickly realizes that group is part of the original Mount Hua sect. Our boy continues and says that kind of blow could be enough to kill a child who hasn't learned martial arts. And casting a dark look, he states that the boy must be aware of that to be punching like that. She must be sure of it, since she's attacking with her own fists. The girl gets irritated by that statement. To him, even at a young age, that boy seems arrogant, and maybe that's his parents' fault. That's why he's not to blame for his actions, since he was influenced from the outside. She keeps staring at him with determination. The protagonist is impressed by that. The way the girl looks at him is dangerous. Many people commit crimes because of that. He says the girl seems to be part of an unorthodox group, and her sect may have influenced her to act that way. A little boy tugs on his robe to get his attention, and Mu Hui watches her curiously. At that moment, the white-haired boy is about to say something. The protagonist waits attentively but gets no response. He simply tells them both to leave before he ends up hurting them. The scene is tense, with everyone still in the middle of the forest. Then the little boy makes a hand symbol. He introduces himself as Lim Sanha from the Fresh Flower sect and thanks them for the help. The man then says his name is Mu Hui, disciple of the Mount Hua sect. Worried, his companion asks if Lim Sanha is alright. He confirms and says one of the kids was the young leader of the Great Truth sect. Gazin and the others were just trying to learn martial arts. They were bothering him because his sect has never had good relations with the sect of Truth. They found out his sect was weaker, so they started picking on him. The young girl asks the boy if the leader knows about those incidents. Lim Sanha confirms and says that in the past he used to fight back and defend himself. After that, the leader of the Fresh Flower sect went to the Great Truth sect. In the flashbacks, we see the leader of the sect of Truth say their children wouldn't do such a thing without a reason. They blamed him and turned it into a full-scale conflict. However, they didn't want any more fighting, so the leader of the Fresh Flower sect backed down. If that war reignites, everything will collapse, and Mu Hui says he understands his reasons. He says he now understands why the boy lets those children harass him. Meanwhile, the young girl finds it outrageous that the external sect of Manhwa is being treated like that. But to the protagonist, everything happens for a reason, and they should listen to the leader. At the religious site, all the members observe the disciples' arrival, impressed. The group enters the place with determination. Muguri notices they all have white cherry blossoms embroidered on their clothing. The members await their introduction. The group makes the symbol of their sect and expresses gratitude for the opportunity to be there. The leader introduces himself as Lim Maguk. He says everyone has heard the story about them defeating the dragon faction in a single night, but the protagonist thinks that's an exaggeration. Lim Maguk realizes it was his son who brought them there, and thanks him for the good work. He then invites the group inside. They are directed to the main hall. Inside, they sit at a table. Everyone compliments the coffee there, but Lim Maguk remains modest. Thoughtfully, the leader fondly remembers Mount Hua. The protagonist says that even though they're tired, they must resolve an issue, then asks how the Fresh Flower sect is doing. But the leader says they're in a difficult position. They never had problems in the past since they were always equal in strength. However, things changed after the Shaanxi attack. The Great Truth sect became more aggressive and now interferes with their group, provoking them. Even his son is suffering the consequences of that. He would love to take revenge for his son, but that's exactly what they want. They're trying to dominate them at any cost. Since he doesn't have the power to defend them, he feels like he's failed as both a leader and a father. Everyone wonders why he didn't request help from the Mount Hua sect. The leader says that despite everything, he's relieved they're there. He says just their presence is enough to dissuade his enemies. But the group senses that the man doesn't believe in them. The protagonist asks him the reason for that expression he had toward his son. His companions don't understand what he means. The leader says he's seeing things that aren't there because he trusts the group. After all, there's no reason for a mere leader of an external sect not to trust them. He says it's now time for dinner, and they should get ready. Realizing the leader doesn't want to accept their help, the warrior understands his position. Apparently, he expected more from such a powerful sect. He considered them too young, and must have decided to keep them there for now and dismiss them later. But he thinks about his son and all the other members who've had to endure so much discomfort. In his memories, the man says he feels bad for them. It seems that at that moment, he was the one acting like a child. He remembers how observant the protagonist is, and still during the meeting, the warrior says they will take care of dinner themselves. His companion considers that attitude quite rude. The leader then asks why they reject his goodwill. The protagonist argues that he can't demand anything from them, since they didn't help before. The man is quite surprised by that. The girl wonders what she just heard. She recalls when the protagonist decided to spare her life. In a flashback, when his companions questioned his methods, he said that setting an ambush was their way of acting. In the present moment, the young woman realizes that man is different from the one she met. She wonders what is happening to him. In the forest, the girl says her senior is acting very strange. Something must have happened, and she wants to know what everyone in the group waits for some kind of explanation. Then the protagonist decides to tell him. His companion doesn't understand the situation. The warrior says it's all very strange and questions the attitude of the sect's children toward them. One of those kids is his successor, so he's not that innocent. But there must be a reason. Why would the sect of truth back down because of them? Doesn't make sense. There are only 4 of them, so the chances of losing are high. In that case, everyone would say the Mount Hua sect failed, and that would be the worst possible outcome. But problems are only problems if they fail. They need to resolve the situation, and the leader definitely has a plan in mind. 2 men are sitting at a table, eating. That should be Fresh Flower territory, but they're all there eating like it's their dining room. You can see in their eyes they're full of complaints and looking for victims. A woman bumps into the men, catching their attention. She gives them a smile, and embarrassed apologizes. Their look is pure hatred, as if they're about to do something terrible. She also mentions something about taxes, which makes the group even more confused. The group of men comments on the protagonist's sect, calling them opportunists. Apparently, the great sect of truth has already taken over that place. The group keeps talking. Something's about to happen. The protagonist orders that none of his companions interfere. No matter what happens, they find that request strange. Another man passes by them, saying he can't take it anymore, and then taps another guy on the shoulder. He asks if they meant to say those things just to be heard. The atmosphere starts to get tense. Then the rival group begins to provoke them, and the sex group shows no fear. The man says he's drinking too much and orders him to stop immediately. But the man continues, saying they're strutting around arrogantly. He calls them a bunch of damn demonic bastards, keeps provoking him, but the man suddenly pulls his chair hard, causing him to fall to the ground, then threatens him, saying that's what happens when someone insults the sect of truth. That's when the sect's leader decides to act. This draws the attention of the man who was attacking. Not only his attention, but that of everyone around. One of them wonders who that person is, but before he can even realize, the young warrior reacts quickly and delivers a strong kick to him. He doesn't just attack that man, but everyone around him. The man asks what's going on. He suddenly can't move anymore. That's exactly what the leader wants to know. But the warrior only wants to know how someone with not even a drop of martial skill dares to wield a sword. especially since he always thought there were differences between orthodox and unorthodox alliances. He asks what the man was planning to do with that sword. Embarrassed, the rival says he only used it to scare him. The leader then takes the sword from him, saying that if he was going to use it to intimidate a weak person, it's better he doesn't have it at all, and tells him to settle things with the same guy he hurt. The man finds it absurd that he's trying to start a fight, so the warrior gets angry, saying that man must think his sect is a joke. The man apologizes but warns that he asked for it. The warrior says the only way he'll be forgiven is by begging for forgiveness at the Fresh Flower sect, and if he's not there before sunset, the sect of truth will become nothing more than a memory. Frightened, the man simply nods. Everyone on his team falls silent at that. It seems their leader is becoming bolder with each passing day. They wonder if things will ever truly be okay. The next day, the leader of the sect of truth is walking through the forest. He's with his group. They all stand before a great temple. 3 times in his life, the sect leader felt such heavy anguish in his chest. The first was when the members of the Manhwa sect were dying in a bloody battle. The second was when his eldest son died. And the last was when he realized his son had been suffering attacks. Now another moment has been added to that list. At the temple, the protagonist notices that his rival still has no intention of apologizing. The old man says that even though he learned martial arts, he knows nothing about proper etiquette. At that, the young man deduces his actions must have bothered him a lot. Maybe he lacks etiquette, but that doesn't even compare to what the great sect of truth is doing, calling it more of a cult. He tells them to come inside and talk. After all, someone might see the scene and misunderstand, and no one benefits from creating misunderstandings. The old man notices that the boy likes to talk, so maybe he's just buying time. The warrior would like to attack him right then and there, but it's better to stay calm for now. Realizing everything is going according to Mui's plan, the leader invites them in. In past memories, we see the leader questioning Master Mu about the need for conflict. The young man asks him to calm down so he can explain. He says he knows they're having a hard time trusting his team, but their leader trusted them, trusted their judgment and actions. He asked them to check the regions of Posung, Weinan, and Lushan all at once. The brutal dragon faction in Posung was connected to martial artists, so conflict there was unavoidable. The leader doesn't understand how just 4 of them managed to defeat such a martial artist without injury. But the young man explains it wasn't 4, it was him alone. That's why he needs this group to trust his team. He's even willing to accept a duel, if that's what they want. The leader then asks if they could fight the entire sect of truth. But the young man reassures him there's no need to worry. He can handle it all on his own. In the present, everyone is seated at a table. Now that the sect of truth is there, everything feels different. Mui says he's interested in settling things once and for all. So he presents his proposal, choosing 1 member from each sect for a duel. Everyone is shocked by the idea. The old man begins to laugh. He realizes the boy didn't tell Manga the full plan. He's impressed by that kind of proposal. He even asks if the man has forgotten the death of his son. He says that boy he trusted so much ended up betraying him. Mag's son died in a duel against the sect of truth. Mui apologizes for that, but the leader says it's not his fault. He asks the young man to continue, and the boy reinforces his proposal. The duel will include 3 people from each side: the leader, the vice leader, and the strongest person from each sect. They then schedule the duel for 5 days from now, but the old man is concerned about the consequences if they lose again. The boy tells him not to worry since their reputation isn't exactly great at the moment. The rival warns him to be careful with his words, saying the only reason they haven't attacked yet is because they were curious about the proposal. The protagonist says he was merely making an observation. Another member of the rival sect asks if he thinks they're weak. He says they're holding back, which makes the protagonist look at them with a challenging gaze. Then the old man stands and says they'll return in 5 days. He also says he hopes it will be a fair duel and that no one dies. The leader is deep in thought about it. The leader of that sect has probably become stronger than him over time. He tells the protagonist they'll seek someone specialized to fight him. The young man simply confirms. Although he trusts him, the leader asks if everything is truly alright. He's going to put all his faith in the young man. Now they head to the training hall. The protagonist comments that he should imagine himself as a dead man over the next few days. During training, everyone is alarmed. The girl asks if senior brother is okay, but no one really knows. He's training like crazy, giving it everything he's got. A member of the team is doing their best to support him. That guy is phenomenal, and without a doubt, that's a demon. The leader continues his training all day long. The boy helping him has his sword in hand. If the leader lowers himself any further, he'll get hurt. He asks him to hang on just a bit more because the training is almost over. Meanwhile, the leader's son is deep in thought. Even if Mugui helps him, he won't become that strong in such a short time. Suddenly, something catches his attention. The protagonist stands before the boy and says the kid is right about that. It really isn't possible to get strong in such a short time. However, everything changes when it comes to gaining experience. So he decides to ask Lim Sana something. He wants to know if he's using his martial arts well, and the boy confirms. Then he asks the boy to imitate him. Lim Sana doesn't quite understand. With that, the protagonist uses his strength against the trunk of a tree. The small child is impressed by the demonstration. The man says the boy has enough internal energy to do that sort of thing. Now he wants to see it with his own eyes. If he succeeds, great. If not, he'll keep trying until he does. Time passes, until the day begins to draw to a close. The protagonist is proud of the boy for giving his all. Now they'll train again the next day. But Lim Sanha is exhausted, lying on the ground with sore hands. It concludes that this man really is a demon. He won't even get any rest as the day is already beginning to break. Now it's the second day of training, and they're going to train together. Yesterday, father and son learned how to use their bodies. The leader's body improved a lot from the training and recovered quickly. Yesterday's training was essential for today's. Now they will learn how to find their stances, and Mu Hui will show them how. He asks his assistants to take their positions. Mu Hui is going to fight all of them. The girl will be the first. She charges at him with everything she's got, but the boy easily dodges her sword and quickly lands a kick on the young woman, who falls hard backward. Then the second assistant steps in, but the warrior continues to defend and counterattack. He's incredibly fast and agile. Though it seems dangerous, Lim Sanha's father decides to just watch for now. He wonders what Mu Hui is trying to show them. In the fight, the protagonist defeats the girl, then dodges and goes back to fighting the second assistant. The boy's sword has more weight now, but it's still not enough. He continues sparring with his teammate, but eventually that one also loses. In the end, he tells his teammates where they went wrong and what they need to improve. That's how both will train until the duel, but the leader doesn't quite understand. To him, it all seemed too wild for a simple training session. But he notices something different. The warrior says that the best way to improve in a short time is to gain more life and death experiences. That's the only way they'll be able to defend themselves from even weak opponents. Now this will be a real fight, and their goal will be to kill him. Lim Sanha is paying close attention, and his father shows concern for him. But the boy is determined to give his best in the fight. If he's going to do it, then it must be done right. So he charges at Mu Hui, but the boy is able to counter with ease. Lim Sanha is sent flying backward. His father watches the scene, and before he realizes it, Mu Hui's sword passes terrifyingly close to his face. The fight is serious, and the leader jumps back. He asks if his son is okay. The boy says it hurt to be hit, but it was no big deal. Behind them, the warrior asks if they're planning to just stand there chatting. They should fight like it's a real battle. He and the boy won't survive if they don't. The leader returns to the fight. With his sword and strength, he gives it everything he's got. But the warrior Mu Hui still manages to hit him with ease. Then he lands a strong punch to the man's face. According to him, in that battle alone, the leader has already died 314 times. The man realizes he can feel his opponent's movements even with his eyes closed. Using that kind of ability shouldn't be hard for him. Yet even so, he can't dodge properly. The leader argues that it's because the boy's attacks are just too fast. He didn't even use his internal energy at that moment, though it seemed like it. The warrior simply asks him not to try to shift his responsibilities onto someone else. Then they return to fighting once again. The leader grows ever more determined. He charges full force toward Mu Hui, but that also proves useless, until the day turns to dusk and the man lies on the ground, utterly exhausted. But Mu Hui shows no mercy and calls him to fight again. This time, however, it is the young boy who approaches him. The man advances too, but once more, the protagonist defeats him. And so they continue training without stopping, throughout the night, without pause. The next day, two men are seated at a table, drinking tea. One of them says that a rising lotus sword should be enough for the battle. The leader of that sect plans to humiliate them all on the day of the duel. The man in front of him will play the role of humiliating them. According to the strange man, it would be a miracle if he doesn't end up paralyzed. He also worries about the consequences after a death, but the leader reassures him, rumors are just rumors. Even if only Mount Hu stands against them, it won't be a problem. The leader says he knows how to handle it on his own. The man in front of him wonders how someone weaker than him can be so arrogant. He questions whether the man is blinded by greed or has always been that way. Everyone followed the order and left the meeting room, but nothing takes Mu Hui's mind off the feeling that he is about to uncover what Kang is hiding. The young man remains thoughtful as he realizes there is something more important. The training of his group must proceed as planned, so everyone is in position in the courtyard, ready to begin. He confesses to Mu Hui that he feels bad for not having supervised for training lately. Now he intends to train them like dogs. Mu Chiol is so eager to debut his sword that he attacks without thinking, hurling the weapon at his friend and trainer. The massive sword cuts through the wind swiftly toward Mu Hui, but he reacts quickly and blocks the attack. The young man realizes, just as he predicted, that the large sword has made his moves stronger and heavier. But with one lightning-fast motion, he corners the warrior and places his blade right at his neck, explaining that the weapon's weight has also made him slower and that a single mistake could cost him his life. As he speaks, Mu Hui catches something in his peripheral vision. He then dodges Mu Hui's attack, realizing that he had actually dodged a scabbard. This is a distraction tactic that forces the enemy to waste their reflex on an object that can't cause harm, only to follow up with a real attack, a feat that throws off the opponent while the sword follows from the opposite direction. Still avoiding the use of her sword, she kicks the master's leg and maintains her advantage, gradually weakening him. Surprised by his defense, the young woman tries to understand what went wrong. Mu Hui explains that although clever, doesn't work so well, because it's too obvious a trick, something an experienced fighter would spot. With that, he strikes her without mercy in a swift move. She escapes and dashes away like a blur. Her senses are sharp, and she watches Manhwa approach from afar like a demon. Recognizing her natural talent, he thinks he can help her better harness that advantage. Taking distance, she gathers herself, still flustered. Manhwa yells in anger that she almost died, and barely finishes her complaint when the master appears behind her, sword against her neck, emphasizing that if she wants to face her enemies, she truly needs to calm down. The girl admits that would take years, and they move on to the next lesson. Mujin steps up to face the challenge. Though very young, he manages to control his temper and act. However, the senior disciple notes that even though he's better in duels, the boy has a weakness. Manhwa launches a side attack. The boy dodges with all his might and repositions himself for a swift counter. He strikes, sending his sword toward the master without hesitation. But Manhwa evades effortlessly and notices the boy isn't as fast as he should be. Even so, the youth doesn't give up and tries to attack from behind as the senior disciple turns his back. However, a staff gently hits his back and he realizes it's not a sword. Indignant, he demands to know why the boy isn't using all of his abilities and is more worried about his well-being than attacking. Firmly gripping the fighting staff with one hand, Manhwa uses the other to strike Jumin with a violent blow directly to the chest, causing such intense pain that he loses his breath and almost vomits. His friends watch anxiously because they know how much that must have hurt. Jumin falls to the ground from the impact of the blow, and Manhwa concludes that he is more afraid of hurting others than of dying, and that is his weakness. The young man writhes in pain while his master reflects that this might not be a problem now, but it will be when he faces a real opponent. When Jumin needs to give his all for himself and for others, he won't be able to act if he gives in to his emotions, and that will put everyone at risk. Concerned about the situation, they all know that if things continue like this, he may have to ask the young man to leave the group. At last, they finish the day's training, and Manhwa emphasizes that they are all aware of their own weaknesses. There is no shortcut to improving overnight. The fastest path is to train without stopping. He concludes by saying that if they understand that, they should practice like there's no tomorrow, because the only way to overcome a problem is by facing it. Jumin listens carefully and reflects but remains on the ground, feeling like a failure. At that moment, night falls in Lushan. The moonlight reflects on the pale gleam of the blade. Manhwa sweats as he exercises his body in strength training. Someone surprises him by asking if he's decided to train late into the night. That person is the leader, Kang Bo-yum. The man admits to being impressed since many people neglect strength training and says Manhwa reminds him of the Iron Mountain Fist King. They face each other in the courtyard, and the young man says he can leave if the leader wants the space for his own training. After all, what is he doing there if not to train? Getting straight to the point, the man says he actually needs a favor, and politely asks the senior disciple to kill him immediately. With an apathetic and unsurprised expression, the young man stares at him. Without hesitation, he raises his sword toward the man and says killing him won't be a problem, but Kang asks him to wait. Manhwa doesn't understand, since he was just about to fulfill the man's request, who seems shocked that he didn't even ask for a reason. But that makes things more exciting, since what he actually wants to propose is a duel. Calmly, the young man agrees without objection and thinks that maybe now he'll be able to discover what the man is hiding. However, the leader sets a condition. He must fight as if he intends to kill. Reflecting on this, Manhwa seems to make a discovery. He observes the leader's hand and sword with caution. Kang finishes his reasoning by saying there's no point in training if it's not for real, and that he too will fight as if he intends to kill the disciple. The battle begins with Kang moving at high speed. With a massive leap, he flies toward Manhwa, using all his precision tactics. His sword dances through the air as the young man blocks. Instead of striking immediately, he grips the hilt with both hands and kneels down to dodge the second blow, which barely grazes his hair. He then rises and brandishes his steel blade, aiming directly at the leader. His movements are cold and swift. Their weapons clash midair as they block each other's strikes. Manhwa clenches his fist and gains momentum, punching Kang hard in the solar plexus. Out of breath, he gasps and drools as he feels the blow. But the boy shows no concern and raises his other arm with the sword, preparing another strike. Kang is almost hit directly by the blade, but dodges to the side. Regaining position, he lashes out at the boy, who blocks the attack by swinging his sword behind him without even looking. The pace of the fight remains intense between them. They both take a brief distance and stare at each other. Kang doesn't back down and attempts another charge, again from the side. Manhwa moves quickly forward. As Kang opens his guard, he allows his opponent to approach undefended and is struck in the face. Even as he loses, he is impressed by the young man's cunning. Recognizing that the disciple used all his perception and calculated the move perfectly. Pausing the fight, the leader asks how he noticed the pattern. Manhwa explains that he realized Kang puts a lot of strength into his strikes, but barely uses stabbing techniques. He also discovered that Kang was hiding the fact that he's not used to fighting with his left hand and took advantage of that gap. The leader agrees with the observation and admits he's still learning to fight with the only arm he has left. To the disciple, the changes seem natural, and he acknowledges that it remains an impressive feat how the leader is overcoming his difficulties. Analyzing the techniques as a whole, he simply points out that the excessive force in the sword throws off the balance of the movements. The young man advises that to correct this, the leader should focus more on practicing precision and piercing techniques. Kang now seems to better understand what he needs to do. As they talk, Manhwa also reveals that he noticed the leader didn't want to show him everything he was capable of. Surprised, the man admits that's true, but that the boy also didn't use even half of his power. Obviously, he admits that if he had used all of his strength, Kang would have been seriously injured. The leader agrees it was better that way. They continue talking as the day breaks and the first rays of sunlight light up the field. Tired, Kang thanks the disciple and heads to his quarters. As he walks, Manhwa reflects that testing his combat skills wasn't the only reason behind that duel. His real objective was to evaluate something. In the end, he actually wanted to test the young man and see if he would be capable of facing the assassin. Even so, if the Zhongnan sect is handling it, there's no reason to be so anxious. Reflecting, the young man concludes that this can only mean Kang knows who the assassin is and understands his power completely, and he probably met him a long time ago. The old monster with many faces. Manhwa recalls that this madman was the one who gave rise to the legend of the demon assassin. Skilled in disguise, few people ever saw his true face. He used to kill leaders of small sects and take their places and identities. Infiltrating the clans, he would also spark bloody conflicts among them. Beyond sowing discord, the monster destroyed the lives of those around him, causing suffering simply for amusement. Revisiting his memories, the disciple recalls the moment he faced the monster when he had disguised himself as Hyunjo. Even though he managed to injure him, it wasn't enough. The monster escaped and remained hidden for a long time. There are rumors that he has returned, but there are also doubts, since the recent killings seem different. The disciple keeps gazing at the horizon, deep in thought. Whether it's just an assassin or truly the demon remains a mystery. What's certain is that the leader of the Radiant Light sects seems to know something important that he chose not to reveal. Otherwise, he wouldn't be this anxious. Trying to connect the dots, Manhwa believes it would be impossible for the monster to have lived this long, so it's likely the assassin is one of his disciples. Even more mysterious than the identity of this figure is the extent of his power. Restless, the young man senses that he needs to get closer and thinks the easiest way is to meet the person tasked with finding him. Absorbed in his thoughts, Manhwa concludes that as long as it isn't an elder, he's confident he can defeat the assassin. In the end, he realizes it would be much better if the Zhongnan sect could handle this without requiring his intervention. That afternoon, the disciples of Zhongnan continue their pursuit. One of them observes sword marks on the ground. Their leader believes that's proof enough they're getting closer to the assassin and orders them not to lower their guard. The group marches forward fearlessly, bracing for the worst. The presence of the assassin can be sensed by the squad leader. Someone watches them from the top of a rooftop. It's Manhwa, who has put his plan into action. He can barely believe there are only 3 of them, and one older man. From experience alone, he already knows he's in trouble. First-generation disciples have priority in the hierarchy. Among them, only one is meant to become the leader of the clan or sect as the core force of the organization. The young Hyunjo, called the Holy Swordsman, is Manhwa sect's favorite. The Zhongnan sect is one of the most renowned in Shaanxi and surely has its own favorite among the young disciples. But who is this great disciple whose fame spreads even though no one knows their name? A young woman smiles as she celebrates finding a martial artist. She introduces herself as Il-mu of the Zhongnan sect. The others in the trio also introduce themselves as Il-sun and Il-hun. Formally and respectfully, Manhwa offers a bow. With humility, he acknowledges that it's an honor to be in their presence, even though he holds a lower position. Kang is also present in the room and calls everyone to a meeting, explaining that this encounter wasn't originally in his plans. Il-mu explains that they were talking about the assassin, and that the leader thought it best to wait for Manhwa's presence, as he wanted to ask for some extra help. Without delay, Il-mu continues explaining that, in fact, there were 5 assassins on the loose, but 2 have been killed. The leader speaks with concern, saying they disguised themselves and split up, making the hunt increasingly difficult. The only thing that has helped is a substance created by the sect leader, which allows the disciples to track the assassin I sent. Even so, it doesn't solve the problem, as they detected the smell of strawberry juice but are unable to pinpoint its exact source. Kang seems shocked to realize that the clan was led to that location. The disciple confirms that there is at least one assassin in the vicinity of the Radiant Light sect grounds, and although she can't determine exactly who it is, she will need their help to try to find out. The leader offers his support, and first, they must be able to identify the imposter. Il-sun reveals that during their investigations, they noticed that at every crime scene there are empty bottles of alcohol, leading them to believe that the assassin's a heavy drinker. For the young disciple of Manhwa, the fact that they don't worry about leaving traces proves their arrogance. So the plan is to throw a party with lots of alcohol. If the culprit is that arrogant, it's likely he'll react to such provocation. And of course, gathering many people in one place could serve as bait. Il-mu pulls something from inside her garment. It's a sleep gas capsule that will put everyone to sleep instantly. Once they identify the assassin, they'll simply make everyone fall asleep to isolate and handle the target. Kang agrees with everything and says they should immediately begin executing the strategy. Determined, he declares that he will throw a big party that night. Night falls in Lushan, and the full moon shines in the dark sky. Jars of soju and mokoli are set on the tables. A huge roasted chicken decorates the dinner table. Kang leads a toast in honor of the disciples of Manhwa and Zhangnan. Everyone raises their cups enthusiastically, downing big gulps of the alcoholic drink. Someone shouts for another bottle. Mu-wei looks at the feast laid out before him, filled with food. Mouth-watering with hunger, he concludes that with a party like this, no one would dare not show up. Then he regains control, thinking it's best not to give in to his desires so they don't suspect he's the culprit. But his friend is drinking like crazy too. Unable to join the fun, he watches with a hint of envy. Noticing the other table, where the young first-generation disciples are gathered, the warrior notices him watching. Discreetly, she smiles at him kindly. Mu-hui doesn't return the gesture, too preoccupied with the thought that they must not suspect his group either. He also can't stand Jumin's habit of constantly touching his nose. His peripheral vision catches a movement from the leader, suddenly standing up from his seat. He then excuses himself from the party, saying he needs to rest for training. No one seems to understand why he's leaving. Elmu gives the signal for them to begin the search for the assassin. Someone fills a cup with mokoli. Two suspects are drinking excessively. A third also fills a cup with soju, chugging it all in one gulp without even stopping to breathe. The sleep gas is released by the disciples and people begin to collapse. Only the warriors remain awake and alert, but no one gets up. This means that either the assassin isn't there or he figured out the plan and is pretending to sleep with the others. Mu-Hua exchanges glances with Il-sun, and they come to an unexpected conclusion. The assassin can only be the leader of the Radiant Light sect. Il-mu points out that she will stand guard since they can't determine whether there's only one assassin on the premises or more. The hall falls into complete silence, and the three of them go off in search of the leader while Mu-Hui asks Il-mu to take care of his disciples. She remains seated, observing. Someone opens a crack in the door of the sect leader's room. Impatient, the man paces back and forth and asks if they've already discovered who the infiltrator is. His expression and gaze shift slightly as he senses something is wrong. After all, the young disciples are simply standing there ready to attack. Accusing him of being the assassin, the three demand that the leader reveal himself and surrender. Kang continues to stare at them seriously. Mu-Wei threatens him and asks if he still intends to deny it. Il-sun and Il-hun prepare to face the leader. Suddenly, a sword pierces through Il-hun's body. His blood gushes across the room, staining his friend's skin. The leader makes a swift move and lunges toward the young Il-sun, kicking him out the window with a swift blow. Mu-Wei also gives a hard kick to Il-hun's body. The two watch as they fall into the field below. The young disciple from Mount Hua already suspected they were the assassins, especially after they claimed they could smell the demon. Even wounded, they didn't die. With red eyes, the two assassins rise to their feet. Mu-Hui and Kang rush to the courtyard. Il-sun asks if Il-hun is okay after that injury. Bleeding, the assassin tries to recover, unaware that Mu-Hui intends to test his martial arts on him. Kang says the disciple was right, that they were indeed the culprits, and there's still one more. But the young man had planned everything and set a trap for Il-mu with the others. She watches everyone fall asleep, before attacking in her craving for bodies. Like a true demon, she extends her claws toward Mu-Hua, but she notices sudden movement. Mu-Chiul charges at her with his large sword, blasting her away with the force of the impact. Il-mu is thrown out the window in a jolt but lands on her feet. Surprised, she can't understand how they didn't fall asleep from the gas. Mu-Mu curses Il-mu, calling her a coward for planning something so outrageous. The assassin watches as they all remove cloths from their noses. Quickly, she realizes they were clever and planned everything so well she didn't even notice. Still, in the face of her power, Il-mu mocks the trio and asks if they really intend to fight her. According to her assessment, it will be easy and boring to defeat them all, and so she offers a proposal to the group. Il-mu suggests they leave Mu-Hua to her and run far away. Her red eyes burn with a terrifying glow. Meanwhile, in the courtyard, Kang charges straight at Il-sun, blocking one of his strikes with his only arm. The demon finds the move far too obvious, but Kang retaliates with a powerful kick to the stomach. The assassin is furious from the hit. The leader's sword slices through the air toward the enemy, with swift movements that throw Il-sun off. The sect leader doesn't hesitate before cutting off the demon's right arm. As blood sprays everywhere, the assassin attacks Kang ferociously, scratching his face with his claws. Il-hum is in attack stance. He launches his claws at Mu-Hui, but the young man slices them off with a single quick sword stroke. Weakened, the demon is then punched hard in the stomach by the disciple. The demon stumbles backward. His eyes boil with hatred as he stares at his opponent. Unfazed, the young disciple doesn't stop and delivers another punch to the assassin. Il-hun is pushed back but regains momentum and charges toward Mu-Hui at high speed. But suddenly he loses strength and drops to his knees, overcome by an incredibly intense pain from within. The senior disciple observes the situation and says the assassin is even weaker than he expected. Facial mimicry and bone contraction techniques are what allow them to change their appearance, and that only works when they look directly into the victim's eyes. Mu-Hui concludes that they cross paths with the disciples of Zhangnan and wants to know who is behind them. Admitting that the young man is correct in his assessment, the demon reveals that two of them were killed during the encounter, but that they defeated the disciples. But Mu-Hui doesn't believe that version of the story because the assassins have no real skill and are no match for the disciples. Bilhoon simply calls him arrogant, finally revealing the sword in his possession, leaving the young man stunned as he sees the weapon, a symbol of the sect forged by great blacksmiths. However, upon closer inspection, he realizes it's a replica. Meanwhile, the demon explains that not just anyone is capable of crafting a sword like that, and even replicating one is a major feat, confirming that this is indeed a sword from the Zongman sect. Even so, the senior disciple has doubts and questions how they gained access to such a weapon, and whether they really killed the group's members. The assassin realizes that Mu Wei still doesn't believe their story. Then he asks slyly if the young man is on the same level as his fellow disciples. At that moment, Mu Wei is left stunned, and El-Hun explains that even the demon assassins have different levels of ability. He cites, for example, their leader, who is incredibly strong, even for the master who trained them, finally revealing that she killed all the disciples of the Zongnan sect. In a fit of rage, Mu Wei ends up injuring himself badly with a sword. Il-Sun screams upon seeing his friend die. Kang doesn't understand why the young man rushed to destroy the demon so quickly. The head rolls across the courtyard like a soccer ball. The leader of the Radiant Light sect can barely believe the technique the young man just used. But before he can say anything, Mu Wei runs off in desperation, racing against time as fast as he can, regretful for wasting so much time testing his martial arts instead of helping his group. He knows he has to hurry and prevent the worst, because his disciples are in danger. The large sword is stained red. Muhua, Muchiol, and Ju Min are nearly dead, and the assassin is carrying their bodies. With a demonic gaze, she says that 2 of them might still leave alive. The 3 of them look at the girl. Muhua says she'll go first since the assassin seemed to like her so much. She prepares for the attack and charges straight at the young woman, but she is easily able to defend herself. With absurd strength, she throws Muhua back. Suddenly, another group member goes toward her. Descending from above, he lands right in front of her. He grabs his sword to strike, but as he attacks, the girl ducks and avoids the blow. Now it's her turn to fight. Using her sword, she manages to wound the young man, who is sent flying backward. Suddenly, someone calls her name. She stops, trying to understand where the voice is coming from. Her eyes are red with fury. The person who called her starts to panic, already full of regret. Her rival is thirsting for a real fight. The one who called her doesn't know what to do. Then we see an old memory. Someone lies on the ground being brutally attacked by a masked figure. That stranger had no chance of survival, and the masked figure is delighted with what he's done. Under a table, we see a girl trying not to make a sound. Her eyes are filled with tears. Back in the present, a girl takes a punch to the face and is thrown far away, crashing hard into the ground. The demonic girl watches her, slightly confused. The 2 exchange frightened glances. Muhua decides to go all in once again, charging at her rival, but her enemy manages to grab the sword and attempts another strike. Muhua doesn't know how to react and ends up getting struck in the stomach. It hurts her deeply. Her rival grabs her by the hair. Now, another group member tries to strike her, charging at her with all his might. The young man grabs his sword with determination and points it at the enemy. But his rival is even faster, and her blow wounds him badly. His companion is horrified by what she sees. She can't believe this is really happening. Suddenly, her younger self appears beside her, pleading for her not to take the risk. The little girl says nothing can defeat that monster. To her, the only option is to run. Even if they try, they won't succeed in defeating her. She says that's the reason she's ignored so many things in life. She never trained enough, only focused on survival. And that same thing happened before. She doesn't have that much courage anymore. Now, instead of fighting, she'll have to make a different decision. But suddenly, Muchiol appears. Even injured, he hasn't given up. He says that person is even stronger than their senior disciple. He tells Mujin to leave and call for backup because he'll hold out as long as he can. Their opponent finds him stubborn for still trying. The girl thinks that running might be the only logical choice at that moment, and she wants to flee, but something feels wrong. She doesn't understand how everyone is still fighting even after losing so much. Then she returns to the repetitive thoughts from training. She doesn't think she's good enough. Muchiol's proposal made her feel relief, not anger. She can't understand why she's still hesitating. She remembers her training with the protagonist. According to him, Mujin has a tendency to self-sabotage. He talked about how she buried her fears in the past and can't deal with them today, and he asked her to remember the first time she ever held a sword. So the young woman begins to try to recall it, and returns to her past memory. She's under the table again, hiding, watching her family member being harmed. While the creature committing the act smiles with satisfaction, she remembers being completely alone in that terrifying place. There was nothing anyone could do during the attack except hide. Resistance was completely useless. The little girl watched as her family was destroyed, and even so she was afraid and thought that was pathetic. To fight with more courage, she needed to learn martial arts. So she trained, and as she did, 2 of her fears faded away. Now she had become a new person. She had truly overcome herself. But she still hesitates because she feels she hasn't trained enough. That's why Mujin doesn't have the courage. She can't understand how everyone around her keeps fighting without hesitation. And she doesn't understand why she felt relief at the chance to walk away. She doesn't feel any different from when she was a child. She feels like she hasn't overcome anything, and that she's still acting like a coward. Apparently, her training was for nothing. She realizes that all she ever did was try to escape her cowardice. To her, that kind of resistance is pathetic. And yet her team kept fighting against injustice. Even injured, they never gave up, and that's why she tried to be like them. In the battle, she rises with determination. Now she decides she won't run anymore. Her rival watches her, surprised, and as she lifts her head, she sees the warrior charging toward her with full force. She finds it curious that she didn't flee, but of course it's still irritating. Unfortunately, that monster manages to defend herself and strikes the girl with full force. She's left completely battered as she's thrown backward. Later, that demonic woman is stacking the team's bodies until she notices movement behind her. She turns around and sees the protagonist kneeling beside one of the bodies. He's apologizing for arriving too late and begs them to hold on just a little longer. The young man intends to end this as quickly as possible. The woman looks at him with curiosity. She finds him very amusing. It's rare to see men as brave as him. She says she doesn't usually like men much though, but she doesn't mind facing someone as bold and courageous as he is. She's hoping he won't disappoint her. The warrior thinks he must not underestimate her. He should just finish her as quickly as he can. He intends to focus solely on his attacks. And the first technique he uses is the dream sword technique. The woman is sent flying backward. She even gets hurt from the blow. She gets excited, realizing that he's not only bold but also skilled. The warrior charges at her with everything he has, using his sword to strike her. At that moment, she realizes she's completely screwed. Suddenly, he uses the falling blossom palm and continues attacking her relentlessly. The woman closes her palms together to use her ability. And just as the young man is about to strike with his sword, she manages to stop him. Then she hurls the warrior far away from there. He's surprised by the sudden attack. The woman rises and watches him. Then she crouches in his sinister stance. The young man keeps holding his sword with determination. The monster is enjoying the game, but the young man only wants to end it. Now the battle becomes even more dangerous and intense. Both are giving everything they've got, but the swordsman continues to hold his ground. He counters with determination and keeps a close eye on his rival's moves. The one is pushed back hard but manages to block a stronger blow. Then she punches the protagonist. He stumbles backward, badly hurt. He glances sideways at the woman, calculating his next move. With resolve, he grabs his weapon and attacks her, and the strike is so intense that the woman is thrown far back. The young man follows her, and the fight continues. From above, a warrior watches the scene unfold. Now he sees where Mugui has been during all this time. He feels he shouldn't try to help in his current state. What he needs to do is try to help the other disciples of Manhwa. In the fight, the enemy now uses a different technique. That technique sends beams of light toward the protagonist. Both are deep in the forest, fighting with determination. The swordsman keeps using powerful techniques, and with his sword, he continues striking the woman. The atmosphere is tense, with energy flying everywhere. The warrior runs straight toward his rival. The woman is impressed by how easily he destroyed her technique. Suddenly, she becomes afraid. The environment around them begins to shift, and red smoke starts to rise around her. It's a new ability being unleashed. The atmosphere begins to consume the whole area, and the woman tries to escape. Even though she's injured, she thinks the whole thing is really cool, and decides to counterattack with her own technique, which is quite powerful. As a result, the young swordsman is thrown back with great force, but he uses that momentum to launch himself forward, and then counterattacks with his sword. The woman dodges the blow, smiling. Mugui can't wait to finish this. That strike was enough to tear off one of her limbs. He kicks the injured woman, and she is hurled backward. There, she realizes she has a big problem, and says she won't be able to find it fun if he keeps acting that way. But of course, the protagonist doesn't waste time. He charges at her with everything he's got, and attacks once again. The woman lies on the ground. The swordsman watches her closely, but incredibly, she stands back up. She looks behind her, anticipating the incoming strike, and uses her power to hit him just the same. It nearly cost him a limb. That scared him a little. He knows he needs to stay more alert. To the woman, her energy is greater than his, and that's what will make her win. Pain might keep him from doing much, and she finds that amusing. The protagonist realizes he has to end this once and for all, so he decides to unleash his final attack. The woman is stunned by what he just did. His sword is pierced right through her body. The demonic woman is thrown violently backward. Even so, she tries hard to brace herself and not be flung too far. Injured, she stays on the ground, trying to understand what just happened. By now, all her strawberry juice is spilled across the floor. On her knees, she realizes the sword sealed her fate. She examines her wounds, finding it all strange and terrifying. She can't understand how she ended up like this. She only wanted to have fun. The protagonist checks his arm to see if he's injured. Even now, the woman finds all of it somewhat amusing. She starts to accept that she lost the fight. The warrior asks if there are other monsters like her out there, but there aren't any left. They're all dead. Apparently, they'll still face trouble from people like that. The woman comments that the assassins won't stop even if the disciples of the 100-faced monster were eliminated. The swordsman asks if that man is really dead. What she knows is that he never appeared in public again, so he must be dead. In truth, he's in isolation, becoming as strong as he can. The warrior grabs the sword embedded in the woman and twists it to cause even more pain. The demon screams in despair, and the protagonist demands that she tell him everything she knows. He wants to know exactly who that 100-faced monster it is. The woman says there's nothing to say because her master is in an undisclosed location. She swears she's telling him the truth, but either way, she has no reason to be honest. Wanting to end it quickly, the young man uses the sword to hurt her even more. Since she enjoys pain, she even smiles. And with that, she's completely defeated. Then night falls, and soon dawn breaks. One of the disciples begins to wake up. She rises, startled. Her entire body aches terribly from the fight. Beside her, the protagonist tells her to be careful not to hurt herself further. She looks at her senior attentively. She asks what happened to the assassins from the night before. Their swordsman tells her not to worry. He's already taken care of them all. Everyone in the group is okay, and he tells the girl to drink something to recover. She drinks it calmly. Then her senior apologizes. He says he didn't expect their rival to be that strong. His companion might not have survived that. He didn't expect everyone to sacrifice themselves like that and considers it foolish. But as their senior, it's his responsibility, and when he returns to Manhwa, he will step down from his position. He has already informed everyone of his decision. Muchiel said she was the only one who stepped up against the assassins. Since it's already late, he doesn't want to hear all the details. In her memories, we return to the scene where she charged at her rival, and her enemy counterattacked, striking her hard. It hurt her a lot. Her sword fell to the ground. The whole time her friend had been watching. Suddenly, he got up. Surprising the enemy? The protagonist listens to every detail of that story. Mujin thinks it all sounds like a joke, but to the swordsman, none of it matters anymore. But the young woman disagrees. Sometimes the difference between a small action and a real decision is what truly changes something. To him, she's like this because she just fought someone incredibly strong. Though sooner or later, it may happen again. What she needs to do is stop dwelling so much on the past. Now the conversation has gone on long enough. Her senior calls her, and she asks where they're going. The warrior says they're both going to train, but she says she's still too hurt to do that. But to Mu Hui, this is the perfect moment. Suddenly, she finds herself in a warm, soothing lake. Her companions are there too, talking about how nice it is to take that time for themselves. Manhwa is also enjoying the moment and relaxing. They are sure she's having a great time.
Guys, that's the end of the video. If you like this video, please leave a comment in the comment section. Also subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Like the video and share it too. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.